There are moments in life when a simple act of kindness becomes the thread that unravels destiny itself. When strangers cross paths under an indifferent sky, neither knowing that their brief encounter will echo through generations. This is not a tale of heroes or villains, but of ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, where a broken wheel and a helping hand set into motion events that would test the very fabric of loyalty, survival, and the unspoken codes of the frontier. The dust hung in the air like a copper veil as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the Kansas prairie. Sarah McKenna sat on the driver's bench of her covered wagon, her calloused hands gripping the reins with a determination that had become as natural to her as breathing. 3 months had passed since she buried her husband Thomas beside the Platte River, his body claimed by the cholera that had swept through their wagon train like an invisible reaper. Now she traveled alone with her 2 children, 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Samuel, heading toward the promise of land in Oregon Territory that seemed more like a fading dream with each passing mile. The wagon lurched suddenly, throwing Sarah forward against the wooden seat. The horses whinnied in confusion as the entire left side of the wagon dipped downward with a sickening crack. Sarah pulled hard on the reins, bringing the team to a halt, her heart sinking as she climbed down to inspect the damage. The rear wheel had splintered, 3 spokes shattered completely. The iron rim twisted at an angle that made her stomach turn. She had seen enough broken wagons along the trail to know this was serious. Without a working wheel, they were stranded in the middle of nowhere, with the nearest settlement at least 2 days' journey in either direction. Emma poked her head out from the canvas cover, her freckled face pinched with worry. "Mama, what happened?" "The wheel broke, sweetheart," Sarah said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Go back inside and watch your brother. I need to think." Sarah walked around the wagon, assessing their situation with the practical mind she had been forced to develop. They had water for 3 days, maybe 4 if they rationed carefully. Food was scarcer, just some hardtack, dried beans, and a small sack of cornmeal. The rifle Thomas had taught her to shoot was loaded and within reach, but what good would it do against the elements or starvation? She looked out across the endless grassland, seeing nothing but rolling hills and scattered cottonwood trees marking a distant creek bed. No other wagons, no settlements, no help. She had learned to pray differently since Thomas died, with less poetry and more desperation. As she stood there in the gathering heat, she closed her eyes and asked for what she needed most, not miracles or divine intervention, but simple human kindness. The answer came not as a whisper from heaven, but as the distant sound of a horse's hooves against the hard-packed earth. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to the rifle leaning against the wagon. A lone rider was approaching from the east, moving at an easy pace that suggested neither urgency nor threat. As the figure drew closer, Sarah could make out a man on a brown mare dressed in worn traveling clothes with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the sun. He rode with the easy posture of someone accustomed to long days in the saddle. The man slowed his horse as he approached, raising one hand in a gesture of peace. "Ma'am," he called out when he was still a respectful distance away, "looks like you might be having some trouble." Sarah kept her hand near the rifle but nodded. "Wheel broke about an hour ago. We're stuck." The rider dismounted and led his horse forward slowly, giving Sarah time to assess him. He was perhaps 40 years old, with a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors, and dark eyes that seemed kind despite the hardness life had carved into his features. A beard covered his jaw, neatly trimmed, and when he removed his hat, she saw hair graying at the temples. He wore a gun on his hip, but it remained holstered, his hands visible and empty. "Name's Jacob Brennan," he said, stopping a few feet from the wagon. "I've got some experience with wagon repairs if you'd allow me to take a look." "Sarah McKenna," she replied, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "And yes, I'd be grateful. I don't have money to pay you, though. Just about $3 in coin and whatever supplies we have left." Jacob shook his head, already kneeling beside the broken wheel. "Didn't ask for payment, ma'am. Out here, folks help each other when they can. Money doesn't mean much when you're 50 miles from anywhere." He examined the damage carefully, running his fingers over the splintered wood and testing the iron rim. "It's bad, but I've seen worse. I've got tools and some spare wood in my pack. Won't be perfect, but I can get you moving again." Emma appeared at the back of the wagon, her curiosity overcoming her mother's instructions. "Are you going to fix our wagon, mister?" Jacob glanced up and smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face into something warmer. "Going to do my best, young lady. What's your name?" "Emma." "And that's my brother Samuel, but he's sleeping because he's little." Well, Emma, I might need a helper. Think you can hand me tools when I ask for them? The little girl nodded eagerly, and Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of worry she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten it was there. She watched as Jacob unpacked his saddlebags, laying out an impressive array of tools. A small saw, chisels, a hammer, spare nails, and several pieces of seasoned wood he had apparently been carrying for just such an emergency. You come prepared, Sarah observed. Learned that lesson the hard way, Jacob replied, beginning to remove the damaged wheel. 5 years ago, my own wagon broke down in the Rockies. No tools, no wood, no help coming. Lost everything I owned because I couldn't repair it before winter hit. After that, I swore I'd never travel unprepared again, and I'd help any soul I found in the same situation. As Jacob worked, Sarah prepared a modest meal over a small fire. Beans and cornmeal mush that she knew wouldn't satisfy a working man but was all she could offer. Samuel woke from his nap and watched the stranger with wide, suspicious eyes staying close to his mother. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Jacob worked with the focused intensity of a man who knew his craft. He cut new spokes from his spare wood, carefully measuring and fitting each piece. The work was slow and exacting, requiring patience and skill. Emma sat nearby, handing him tools when asked and chattering about their journey, about her father who had died, about the home they hoped to build in Oregon. Jacob listened without judgment, occasionally asking gentle questions that made the little girl feel heard. Your pa was a good man, sounds like, Jacob said at one point, fitting another spoke into place. He was the best, Emma said firmly. He taught me how to read and how to identify birds, and he always made Mama laugh. Then he left you something valuable, Jacob replied. The best parts of people stay with us even after they're gone. As darkness fell, Jacob lit a lantern and continued working by its flickering light. Sarah brought him a plate of food and a cup of water, which he accepted gratefully. You should rest, she told him. You've been at it for hours. Almost done, he said between bites. Want to make sure it's solid before I stop. A weak repair is worse than no repair at all. Sarah sat nearby, watching him work. There was something peaceful about the scene, the quiet companionship of shared purpose. Why are you out here alone? She asked. If you don't mind my asking. Jacob paused, considering his answer. I'm a scout. Work for different wagon trains and freight companies, finding the best routes, checking on water sources and bridge conditions. I travel this territory several times a year. Right now, I'm heading back east after guiding a group to Fort Laramie. Must be lonely work. Sometimes, he admitted, but I've never been much for staying in one place. After what happened with my family, the open road suits me better than four walls ever did. Sarah wanted to ask what had happened, but something in his tone suggested it was not a story he wished to tell. They sat in companionable silence as he finished the repair, testing each spoke, and finally reattaching the iron rim with careful precision. When he was satisfied, he lowered the wagon back onto the new wheel and rocked it back and forth, checking for weakness. That should hold, he said finally. It's not as strong as a wheelwright would make, but if you go easy and check it regularly, it'll get you where you're going. I don't know how to thank you, Sarah said, meaning it deeply. You could have ridden past. Most would have. Jacob cleaned his tools and packed them away. Most wouldn't, he corrected gently. People out here understand that today you help someone, tomorrow someone helps you. It's how we all survive. He accepted Sarah's offer to sleep near their camp for the night, spreading his bedroll a respectful distance from the wagon. As Sarah tucked her children into their makeshift beds inside the covered wagon, Emma whispered, I like Mr. Brennan, Mama. He's nice. He is, Sarah agreed, kissing her daughter's forehead. There are still good people in the world, sweetheart. Remember that. Sarah lay awake long after the children slept, listening to the night sounds of the prairie, the wind through the grass, the distant call of a coyote, the soft breathing of the man who had saved them without expecting anything in return. She thought about Thomas, about the life they had planned, about the uncertain future that stretched before her. Tomorrow they would part ways with Jacob Brennan, probably never to meet again. That was the way of the frontier, brief connections that burned bright and then faded into memory. But as she finally drifted towards sleep, Sarah felt something she had not felt since Thomas died, a small ember of hope that perhaps they would make it after all, that perhaps kindness still existed in a world that had seemed determined to crush it out of her. She did not know, could not possibly know, that the man sleeping peacefully beneath the stars had just altered the course of all their lives in ways that would only become clear when the sun rose again. In the darkness, Jacob Brennan stared up at the vast spread of stars, thinking about the woman and her children in the wagon behind him. He had told her the truth about being a scout, but not the whole truth. He had not mentioned the men he was running from, the bounty on his head from a crime he did not commit, or the reason he traveled alone through territory most people crossed in groups. He had not told her that by helping her he may have put her in danger, because the men looking for him would question anyone they found along his trail. These thoughts troubled him, but he pushed them aside. He had made his choice and he would not regret an act of decency. If trouble came, he would deal with it then. For now he had done what his conscience demanded, and he would ride out at first light, putting distance between himself and the McKenna family before anyone came looking. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. Plans that would arrive with the sunrise, carried on horseback by men whose silence spoke louder than any words, whose purpose was written in the hard set of their jaws and the hands that rested on their weapons. Plans that would turn a simple act of kindness into something far more complicated, far more dangerous, and far more consequential than either Sarah McKenna or Jacob Brennan could possibly imagine. The morning arrived with a stillness that felt unnatural. Sarah woke before dawn, as she always did, and climbed out of the wagon carefully to avoid waking the children. The air was cool and carried the smell of grass and earth, fresh with dew. Jacob was already awake, checking his horse and preparing to leave. His bedroll was tied and his saddlebags packed, ready for departure. "Leaving so early?" Sarah asked, approaching with a cup of coffee she had brewed over the rekindled fire. It was weak, made from ground she had already used twice before, but it was hot, and that counted for something. Jacob accepted the cup gratefully. "Best to get moving while the day is young. You should do the same once your children wake. The wheel will hold better if you keep a steady pace and avoid any rough ground." He pulled a small leather pouch from his pocket and pressed it into her hand. "Take this. It's not much, just some dried venison and pemmican." "You'll need more provisions before you reach the next settlement." Sarah tried to refuse, but Jacob closed her fingers around the pouch firmly. "Please," he said, "you've got 2 children depending on you. Pride doesn't fill empty bellies." Before Sarah could respond, Jacob's horse suddenly lifted its head, ears pricked forward, alert to something Sarah could not yet hear. Jacob's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The easy warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by something hard and calculating. His hand moved to his gun, not drawing it but resting there with the readiness of a man accustomed to trouble. "Get in the wagon," he said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that made Sarah move without question. "Wake your children, but keep them quiet. Don't come out no matter what you hear." Sarah's heart hammered as she climbed into the wagon and shook Emma and Samuel awake. "Quiet now," she whispered urgently. "Stay here with me and don't make a sound." Through a gap in the canvas, Sarah watched as 3 riders emerged from the morning mist like specters, their horses moving at a walk across the prairie. They rode in a loose formation, spread out enough to cover ground but close enough to support each other. Even from a distance, Sarah could sense the threat they carried with them. It was in the way they sat their horses, in the deliberate pace of their approach, in the silence that preceded them like a warning. Jacob stood beside his horse, one hand on the saddle, the other hanging loose near his gun. He did not mount or flee. Instead, he waited with the stillness of a man who had faced such moments before and survived them. The riders stopped about 20 feet from Jacob's position. The man in the center was tall and lean, with a face that looked carved from granite and eyes the color of flint. He wore a dusty black coat and a wide-brimmed hat, and when he spoke, his voice carried easily across the distance. "Jacob Brennan," the man said. It was not a question. "Marshal Cobb," Jacob replied evenly. "Been looking for me long?" 3 months, Cobb said. "You left quite a trail. Most men wouldn't have lasted this long. Most men wouldn't have been running from false accusations." Cobb's expression did not change. "That's for a judge to decide. Not you. You're wanted for the murder of William Cross in Leavenworth. There were witnesses. There were liars," Jacob corrected. "Cross was shot in the back in a back alley at midnight. I was playing cards at the Silver Dollar with a dozen men who can vouch for me. But somehow those witnesses didn't matter as much as the word of Cross's business partners, did they? Men who stood to gain from his death and needed someone to blame." The marshal's jaw tightened. "You ran. Innocent men don't run. Innocent men who know they won't get a fair trial do, Jacob said. Cross had powerful friends, and I'm just a scout. My word against theirs was never going to count for much, and we both know it. One of the other riders, a younger man with nervous energy radiating from him, shifted in his saddle. We could just take him, Marshal. 3 against 1. Could try, Jacob said mildly, though his eyes never left the Marshal. But someone's getting hurt if you do, and I'm betting it won't just be me. Is bringing me in worth dying for, Marshal? Or you boys ready to leave widows over something you're not even certain about? Inside the wagon, Emma clutched her mother's arm. Mama, what's happening? Is Mr. Geary, Brennan, in trouble? Hush, baby, Sarah whispered, though her own mind was racing. Murder. Jacob was accused of murder. The man who had helped them, who had been kind to her children, who had worked through the night to repair their wheel. She looked through the gap in the canvas, studying Jacob's posture, the calm way he stood facing down 3 armed men. Whatever else he might be, he was no coward. Marshal Cobb dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and visible. I'm not here to kill you, Brennan.
I'm here to bring you into face trial.
You say you're innocent. Prove it in court. And if the court was bought before I ever stood before it, then that's the chance you take. Same as every man faces when accused. Cobb took a step forward. I'll promise you this. I'll make sure you get to Leavenworth alive. I'll make sure you have a lawyer. I'll make sure the trial is public and proper. That's more than you'll get by running until someone else catches up to you. Someone who might not care whether you reach a courtroom or not. Jacob was quiet for a long moment, weighing options that all seemed to end badly. Sarah watched his face, seeing the conflict there, the knowledge that he was trapped either way. She felt a surge of unexpected anger at the unfairness of it, that a man who had shown her nothing but decency was being hunted for a crime he claimed he did not commit. Before she knew what she was doing, Sarah pushed aside the canvas and climbed down from the wagon, her rifle in her hands. All 4 men turned to stare at her, surprise evident on their faces. Mrs. McKenna, Jacob said sharply. Get back in the wagon! Sarah ignored him, addressing the Marshal instead. This man saved our lives yesterday. Our wheel was broken. We were stranded with no water nearby and no help coming. He could have ridden past, but he didn't. He spent hours repairing our wagon, gave us food from his own supplies, and asked for nothing in return. Does that sound like a murderer to you? Cobb studied her with those hard flint eyes. Ma'am, I appreciate what he did for you, but helping a stranger doesn't make a man innocent of other crimes. Plenty of bad men have done good deeds, and plenty of good men have been accused of bad deeds, Sarah countered. You say there were witnesses against him? Were there witnesses for him? Did anyone check his alibi at this silver dollar? Or was it just easier to believe the accusation because the dead man had powerful friends? The Marshal's expression flickered just for a moment, revealing something that might have been doubt.
The investigation is not my concern, ma'am.
I'm just tasked with bringing him in. Then you're not seeking justice, Sarah said. You're just following orders. There's a difference. Jacob stepped forward, placing himself between Sarah and the Marshal. Mrs. McKenna, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but this doesn't concern you. These men have a job to do, and you shouldn't get involved. You made it my concern when you helped us, Sarah said fiercely. I won't stand by and watch an innocent man be taken for something he didn't do. The 3rd rider, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. He was older than the other deputy, with grey in his beard and scars on his hands that spoke of hard years. Marshal, maybe we should consider what the lady says. If there's doubt about Brennan's guilt, shouldn't we look into it before holding him back? Our job is to bring him in, not investigate the case, Cobb replied, but his tone had lost some of its certainty. Our job is to uphold the law, the older deputy countered. If the law was twisted to serve powerful men instead of justice, then what are we upholding? The tension stretched like a bowstring pulled taut, ready to snap. Sarah could see Jacob calculating his chances, his hand near his gun, ready to draw if needed. The Marshal stood rigid, authority and doubt warring across his features. The younger deputy looked between them all, uncertain which way things would break. It was Emma who changed everything. The little girl appeared at the back of the wagon, her voice clear and innocent in the heavy silence. Mr. Brennan, are these men going to hurt you? Jacob's expression softened as he looked at the child. No, Emma, everything's going to be fine. Go back inside with your brother. But you fixed our wagon. Emma said, her voice trembling. You were nice to us. Why do they want to take you away? Cobb looked at the little girl, then back at Jacob, then at Sarah standing with her rifle and her fierce determination. Something in his face shifted, a crack in the granite. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking tired. Brennan, he said finally, I'm going to make you an offer, and it's the only one you'll get. You come with us willingly, and I give you my word we'll stop in the next town and send telegrams to Leavenworth. We'll get statements from the men at the Silver Dollar. We'll check your alibi properly. If it holds up, if there's real doubt about your guilt, I'll take that to the judge myself. But you have to come peacefully, and you have to trust that I'm a man of my word. And if I don't? Jacob asked. Then we do this the hard way, and someone probably dies. Maybe me, maybe one of my men, maybe you. And the lady and her children get to witness violence they shouldn't have to see. That what you want? Jacob looked at Sarah, at Emma peering from the wagon, at the marshal and his deputies. He seemed to come to a decision, and his hand moved away from his gun. Your word, Marshal? You'll investigate properly? My word, Cobb said, for what it's worth. Jacob nodded slowly. Then I'll come with you. But first I need to make sure Mrs. McKenna and her children can reach the next settlement safely. That wheel I repaired is holding, but it's not strong. I need to know they'll make it. Cobb considered this, then turned to his older deputy. Harrison, you're the best tracker we've got. You'll escort the lady and her children to Willow Creek. Make sure they arrive safe. Help them find supplies and lodging. Then catch up with us in Junction City. Harrison nodded, relief evident on his weathered face. Be glad to, Marshal. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, though she blinked them back fiercely. Jacob, you don't have to do this. You could run. We could say you're headed south. Jacob walked to his horse and began removing his saddlebags. He brought them to Sarah and placed them in her hands. There's enough supplies here to get you to Oregon if you're careful. Some money, too. Not much, but enough to buy what you need in Willow Creek. He smiled slightly. And running just delays the inevitable. Maybe it's time I stopped running and started fighting properly. He knelt down so he was eye level with Emma, who had climbed down from the wagon despite her mother's protests. You take care of your mama and your brother, understand? You're the big sister, and that's an important job. Emma threw her arms around his neck, hugging him fiercely. You're innocent, Mr. Brennan. I know you are. Thank you, sweetheart, Jacob said softly. That means more than you know. Sarah watched as Jacob mounted his horse, his hands now bound in front of him by the marshal, though loosely enough that he could ride comfortably. The three lawmen formed up around him, preparing to depart. Cobb tipped his hat to Sarah, a gesture of respect that surprised her. Mrs. McKenna, I can't say whether Brennan is guilty or innocent, but I can say I'll do my job properly. You have my word on that. See that you do, Marshal, Sarah replied. Because if an innocent man hangs because you didn't try hard enough, you'll have to live with that for the rest of your life. Cobb's jaw tightened, but he nodded and turned his horse east toward Junction City. The younger deputy followed, leading Jacob's horse. Jacob looked back once, meeting Sarah's eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection forged in crisis and sealed with an uncertain farewell. Harrison, the older deputy, approached Sarah's wagon and touched his hat. Ma'am, if you're ready, we should get moving. Willow Creek is about 15 miles northwest. We can make it by nightfall if we keep a steady pace. Erin nodded, gathering the children back into the wagon. As she climbed onto the driver's bench and took up the reins, she looked at the leather pouch Jacob had given her, at his saddlebags now resting in her wagon, at the repaired wheel that had held through the night. She thought about the man who had stopped to help strangers, who had worked through darkness to give them a chance at survival, who now rode toward an uncertain fate with his hands bound and his future in the hands of a system he did not trust. The wagon rolled forward, Harrison riding alongside at a respectful distance. Emma sat beside her mother, unusually quiet, watching the prairie roll past. Samuel, too young to fully understand what had happened, played with a wooden horse Jacob had carved for him the night before. Mama, Emma said after a long silence, Mr. Brennan didn't kill anyone, did he? Sarah was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. I don't believe he did, sweetheart. But sometimes in this world, believing isn't enough. Sometimes people have to fight to prove the truth. Will we see him again? I don't know, Sarah said honestly. I hope so. But right now, all we can do is pray that justice finds him. Real justice, not the kind that's bought and paid for. The wagon creaked forward, the repaired wheel holding steady beneath them, carrying them toward Willow Creek and whatever lay beyond. Behind them, growing smaller with distance, 4 riders moved east across the prairie, carrying with them a story still unfinished, a question of guilt and innocence that would be answered in courtrooms and confrontations yet to come. Sarah did not know, could not know, that the wheels set in motion by a broken wagon and a kind stranger would turn in ways none of them could predict, that the choice Jacob made that morning to surrender rather than fight would ripple outward, affecting lives and revealing truth that powerful men had worked hard to bury, that sometimes the smallest acts of decency carried the greatest consequences, and that the real story of what happened in that back alley in Leavenworth was far more complicated and dangerous than anyone suspected. The sun climbed higher as they traveled, and the prairie stretched endless and indifferent before them, keeping its secrets as it always had. 3 weeks passed before Sarah McKenna heard anything about Jacob Brennan's fate. In that time, she and her children had settled temporarily in Willow Creek, a small but growing settlement that served as a supply point for wagon trains heading west. Deputy Harrison had been true to his word, ensuring they found safe lodging at a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. N. Garrett, who charged reasonable rates and asked few questions. Sarah took work where she could find it, washing clothes for the merchants and their families, baking bread for the general store, mending torn garments that frontier life seemed determined to shred. The money was modest but steady, and with what Jacob had left them, they could survive comfortably, while Sarah decided whether to continue west to Oregon or establish roots here where life seemed less uncertain. Emma attended the small schoolhouse that had opened the previous year, taught by a young woman from Boston who believed frontier children deserved education as much as their eastern counterparts. Samuel spent his days playing with other children in the settlement, his memories of the wagon journey already beginning to fade into the formless past of early childhood. But Sarah could not forget Jacob Brennan. At night, when the children slept, she thought about the man who had stopped to help them, who had worked through darkness to repair what was broken, who had surrendered himself rather than risk violence in front of children. She wondered if Marshal Cobb had kept his word, if the investigation had proceeded, if Jacob was alive or dead or rotting in some cell awaiting a trial that might never be fair. The answer arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in the form of Deputy Harrison, who rode into Willow Creek looking tired and dusty from hard travel. He found Sarah at the general store, where she was delivering a batch of bread still warm from Mrs. Garrett's oven. "Mrs. McKenna," Harrison said, removing his hat. "Could we speak privately?" Sarah's heart clenched with worry. "Is he dead? But it's complicated. Can we sit?" They found a quiet corner outside the store, away from curious ears. Harrison sat heavily on a bench, accepting the water Sarah brought him before beginning his story. "Marshal Cobb kept his word," Harrison began. "We took Brennan to Junction City and sent telegrams to Leavenworth. Started asking real questions, the kind nobody bothered to ask when Cross was killed. Turns out there were 12 men who remembered Brennan at the Silver Dollar that night, playing poker from 8 in the evening until past midnight. The murder happened around 11. Brennan couldn't have been in 2 places at once. Then he's free?" Sarah asked, relief flooding through her. Harrison's expression darkened. "Should be, but it gets uglier from there. We started digging into William Cross's business partners, the men who first accused Brennan. Cross owned a freight company, decent-sized operation. His partners were Philip Marston and a man named Silas Wade. After Cross died, they took control of the company, bought out his widow for practically nothing, and within 2 months had expanded operations significantly. Convenient timing. They killed Cross themselves," Sarah said, understanding dawning. "That's what we think. Cross was apparently planning to sell his share of the company to a competitor, would have broken up their partnership. Marston and Wade couldn't allow that, so they killed him and needed someone to blame. Brennan was convenient. A drifter with no powerful friends, no family to defend him, no lawyer who would work for free." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. "Then why isn't Jacob free? Why isn't he here telling me this himself?" "Because Marston and Wade have influence. They have money and connections, judges and politicians on their payroll. When we brought evidence of Brennan's innocence to the court, suddenly witnesses started disappearing. Men who swore Brennan was at the Silver Dollar got offered jobs out of state or received anonymous threats. The judge who was set to hear the case suddenly took ill, replaced by another judge known to be friendly to Marston's interests. This is corrupt," Sarah said flatly. This is evil. Yes, ma'am, it is. But it's also reality. Powerful men protect their interests, and the law bends when enough money pushes on it. Harrison leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. But here's the thing. Marshal Cobb is a stubborn man when his honor is questioned. He gave his word to investigate properly, and he takes that seriously. He's been gathering evidence, real evidence that can't be ignored or bought off. Letters, financial records, testimony from Cross's widow about her husband's plans. Cobb's building a case not just to free Brennan, but to charge Marston and Wade with murder. How long will that take? Sarah asked. Could be months. Could be never, if Marston gets wind of what's happening and makes sure Cobb has an accident. These are dangerous men who've already killed once. Harrison reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed letter. Brennan asked me to give you this. He's being held in Junction City, protective custody, Cobb calls it, keeping him safe while the investigation proceeds. Brennan wanted you to know what was happening. Didn't want you worrying or thinking he'd forgotten the kindness you showed him. Sarah took the letter with trembling hands. The paper was rough, standard prison issue, but Jacob's handwriting was clear and steady. She waited until Harrison left before opening it, retreating to the privacy of her room at the boarding house. The letter read, Mrs. McKenna, I hope this finds you and your children well and safe in Willow Creek. Deputy Harrison tells me you have work and lodging, which relieves my mind considerably. I have not forgotten the debt I owe you, not just for speaking on my behalf to Marshal Cobb, but for treating me with dignity when you had no reason to trust me. The situation here is complicated. I am not free, but I am alive. And that is more than I expected when those riders first appeared. Marshal Cobb has proven to be a man of honor, which is rarer than it should be in this world. He is fighting for justice on my behalf, though the fight is harder than it should be. I write not to burden you with my troubles, but to thank you. In the darkest moment, when I was certain my life would end badly, either at the end of a rope or a gun, you stood up for a stranger. Your daughter Emma told me I was innocent, believed it with the certainty children have before the world teaches them to doubt. That faith mattered more than I can express. Whatever happens to me, whether I walk free or meet a darker fate, know that the night I spent repairing your wagon was among the best of my life. In helping you, I remembered who I wanted to be, not the man circumstances had forced me to become. You gave me that gift, and I am grateful. Take care of those children. They are lucky to have you. With respect and gratitude, Jacob Brennan. Sarah read the letter 3 times, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She folded it carefully and placed it in her Bible, the one possession she had carried from her old life, the one that contained pressed flowers from her wedding and a lock of Thomas's hair. Jacob's letter would rest there too, a reminder that goodness still existed in a world that often felt determined to destroy it. Weeks turned into months. Summer faded into autumn, and autumn gave way to the first breath of winter. Sarah continued her work in Willow Creek, saving money and building a life. Emma thrived in school, showing a gift for mathematics that her teacher said was remarkable. Samuel grew taller and stronger, losing the baby softness that had made him seem so vulnerable on the trail. News filtered in slowly from Junction City and Leavenworth. Marshal Cobb's investigation had uncovered damning evidence against Marston and Wade. Cross's widow, protected by Cobb and determined to seek justice for her husband, provided letters that revealed the planned sale of the freight company. A clerk from Marston's office, disgusted by what he had witnessed, came forward with financial records showing suspicious payments made the day after Cross's death. Most crucially, a witness emerged, a night watchman who had seen 2 men fleeing the alley where Cross was killed, and he identified them as Marston and Wade. But justice moved slowly, grinding through legal procedures and political maneuvering. Twice the case was delayed by judges claiming insufficient evidence. Once, the courthouse where records were stored mysteriously caught fire, though Cobb had been smart enough to keep copies hidden elsewhere. Marston and Wade used every tool at their disposal to avoid trial, but Cobb matched them step for step, his stubbornness proving more durable than their money. It was a cold December morning when Deputy Harrison rode back into Willow Creek, this time with a companion. Sarah was hanging laundry behind Mrs. Garrett's boarding house when she heard the horses approaching. She turned, her hands red from the cold water, and saw Harrison dismount. But it was the second rider who made her heart stop. Jacob Brennan looked thinner than she remembered, harder around the edges, but his eyes held the same kindness she had seen that day on the prairie. He dismounted slowly, as if unsure of his welcome, and removed his hat. "Mrs. McKenna," he said simply. Sarah dropped the wet shirt she was holding and walked toward him, propriety forgotten. "Jacob, you're free?" "As of 3 days ago," Harrison said, grinning widely. "Marston and Wade are in custody awaiting trial. The judge couldn't ignore the evidence anymore, not with a U.S. Marshal threatening to take the case to federal authorities. Brennan's name is cleared, officially and completely. The trial for Marston and Wade starts in January," Jacob added. "Cobb wants me to testify, tell the jury what I know about how they manipulated the initial investigation. After that, I'm truly free to go wherever I choose." Emma burst from the back door of the boarding house, having heard the commotion. She saw Jacob and let out a shriek of joy, running toward him with her arms outstretched. Jacob caught her and lifted her off the ground, laughing in a way that made him look years younger. "Mr. Brennan! You came back. Mama said you might never come back, but I knew you would." Samuel appeared next, more cautious but curious. Jacob set Emma down and knelt to be at the boy's level. "You probably don't remember me, Samuel. I'm Jacob, a friend of your mother's. You fixed our wagon," Samuel said seriously. "Mama told me." "That I did," Jacob agreed. "Best thing I ever fixed." Garrett, drawn by the noise, stood in the doorway with her hands on her hips. "Well, don't just stand out in the cold. Bring these men inside. I'll make coffee and you can tell us everything properly." They gathered in Mrs. Garrett's warm kitchen around her sturdy table with cups of coffee and fresh bread. Jacob told them the full story, the investigation, the evidence, the legal battles. He spoke of Marshal Cobb's determination, of the widow Cross's courage in coming forward, of the slow grinding wheels of justice finally turning in the right direction. "Cobb saved my life," Jacob said. "Not just by investigating, but by keeping me in protective custody where Marston's hired guns couldn't reach me. There were 3 attempts to kill me before I even reached Junction City. Without Cobb, I'd be dead." "And what will you do now?" Sarah asked. "After the trial?" Jacob was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "I've been thinking about that for months. I've lived on the trail for years, moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. After everything that's happened, I realize that's not living. It's just existing. I want more than that. I want to build something, be part of something lasting." He looked at Sarah directly. "I know this is forward, and you have every right to refuse. But I'd like to stay here in Willow Creek if you'll have me nearby. I've saved money from my scouting work, enough to buy land and start a small ranch. Nothing grand, just enough to raise horses and maybe cattle. I could teach Emma to ride properly, help Samuel learn to handle stock. I could be a friend to you, if you'll allow it, and maybe something more, if time proves I'm worthy of that trust." Sarah felt her breath catch. She looked at this man who had saved her family, who had endured imprisonment and injustice with dignity, who was offering not pretty words but practical plans and patient hope. She thought of Thomas, who would always hold a place in her heart, but who was gone, leaving her to navigate an uncertain world alone. "I'd like that," she said softly. "But let's take it slow. Let's be friends first and see where that leads. These children have lost enough. They need stability, not another change that might not last." Jacob smiled, genuine and warm. "Slow is good. Slow is what I'm learning to appreciate. I spent years running, and where did it get me? Nowhere I wanted to be. I'm done running, Mrs. McKenna. I'm ready to stay put and see what grows when you give things time." Deputy Harrison, who had been listening quietly, stood and stretched. "Well, since everyone here seems determined to become respectable citizens, I should head back to Junction City. Cobb will want to know Brennan arrived safely." He looked at Jacob seriously. "Don't forget, trial starts January 8th. Be there or Cobb will come fetch you personally." "I'll be there," Jacob promised. "I owe Cobb that much and more." After Harrison left, Mrs. Garrett made lunch, insisting Jacob stay and eat properly. The children peppered him with questions about his time in custody, about the marshal, about what would happen to the bad men who had tried to hurt him. Jacob answered patiently, never talking down to them, treating their concerns with the same seriousness he would give an adult. As the afternoon light slanted through the kitchen windows, Sarah watched Jacob help Samuel build a tower from wooden blocks while Emma read aloud from her schoolbook, showing off her progress. She saw the way he listened to them, the way he laughed at Samuel's jokes and praised Emma's reading. She saw a man who had been tested by hardship and emerged still capable of kindness. still willing to believe in better possibilities. That night, after the children were asleep and Jacob had taken a room at the boarding house for the duration of his stay, Sarah stood at her window looking out at the settlement. Lamplight glowed from windows, smoke rose from chimneys, and somewhere in the darkness people were living their lives, facing their own struggles, fighting their own battles with injustice and hardship. She thought about the broken wagon wheel that had brought Jacob into their lives, how a moment of misfortune had become a thread connecting strangers, pulling them through crisis and separation, and ultimately bringing them back together. She thought about how the smallest acts could have the largest consequences, how helping someone could save them in more ways than one. Tomorrow Jacob would start looking at land. The trial would proceed in January, and justice would finally be served. Spring would come, and with it the season for new beginnings. The wheel that had broken on a dusty prairie had been repaired, stronger than before, able to carry them forward into whatever came next. Sarah pulled the curtain closed and turned toward her children sleeping peacefully in the small room they shared. Outside, the world was vast and often harsh, filled with people who would break you for profit, and systems that bent toward the powerful. But it also contained men like Jacob Brennan and Marshall Cobb, women like Cross's widow who chose courage over silence, and strangers who stopped to help when they could simply ride past. The wagon wheel had broken, but it had been fixed, not perfectly, but well enough to move forward. And sometimes, Sarah thought as she climbed into her own bed, that was all anyone could ask for. To be fixed well enough to keep moving, to keep building, to keep hoping that tomorrow would be better than today. In the morning, there would be bread to bake, and laundry to wash, and children to feed. There would be Jacob looking at land and making plans. There would be the slow, careful work of building trust and friendship. There would be the trial in January, where truth would finally be spoken and heard. But for now, there was rest. There was safety. There was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, despite everything, justice found its way home, carried on the shoulders of stubborn lawmen, and rescued by the courage of ordinary people who refused to let innocent men be destroyed by lies. The wheel had broken. The riders had come in silence. But the story had not ended the way powerful men had planned. It had ended with truth, with freedom, and with the possibility of new beginnings rising like dawn over the prairie, inevitable and full of light.